So lately I've been doing a study on C21 on YouTube. For those who don't know, C21 is the Government of Canada's new gun control legislation that they're trying to get through right now. However, that's not all that important to the title of this video. What I actually want to discuss is something I discovered while doing research for this study. And in particular, I want to take a look at this article here, this StatsCan article. So this is the Trends in Firearm-Related Violent Crime in Canada from 2009 to 2020. This is authored by Mary Allen, and she works for the Canadian Centre for Justice, Community and Safety Statistics. That's the CCJCSS. They do all sorts of studies and all sorts of reviews on all sorts of crime stats. And why I was looking at this article specifically is it was released on May 27th, 2022, which, if you don't know, that coincides very nearly perfectly with the release of C21 last year. If you go to look at C21, C21 here was announced on May 30th, 2022 in Parliament. So that's 3 days apart, but that's actually back-to-back days because the 27th was a Friday and the 30th was a Monday, so that's back-to-back business days. So these things were released in lockstep, and this particular article has often been quoted throughout all of C21's conversation, as well as discussions in SecU and probably now discussions in SecD, which is the Senate committee that's currently discussing it. All of that's not important though. What I want to point out is two very inaccurate statements put out by this article. One, if you know who Gary Mauser is, you've probably already heard about this one. But then the second one is something he didn't notice, and I don't think anyone else has noticed, which is why I'm making this video. And I think it's very, very important to point out because the actual core statistical numbers in this study are wildly off, like to the point of fraud off. I don't know if I'm missing something. I don't know what it is, but we'll get to that part later. First, we're going to start with a couple of basic things about this article. Then we're going to get to Gary Mauser. Then we're going to get to our second point there, which is that just, I don't know what's going on. Hopefully maybe somebody can point it out to me. Put it down in the comments if you can. I don't know what's going on, but it's a little disturbing how off some of these numbers are. So first off, I just want you to take these numbers into account. Firearm-related crime represents about 2.8% of all victims of violent crime reported in Canada in 2020. And that accounts for roughly 8,344 victims. We're going to use those numbers later. I just want to point them out now. This whole article is based on a couple of data sources, and I want to get those out of the way. So at the bottom of their article here, it says data sources and concepts. One, they're based on the Uniform Crime Reporting Survey. And they kind of run the Uniform Crime Reporting Survey that's directly tied to the CCJCSS. They kind of manage and gather this information. It's their own survey. And then two, the second part I want to point out here is the homicide survey. All the information in this article is also based on the homicide survey. That'll be important coming up pretty quickly here. And then three, I just want to point out that this particular survey does not include Quebec. No stats in Quebec except for the homicide stats in this survey, which we're not going to be talking about, but if you happen to read this article on your own, keep in mind that it doesn't include Quebec except for the homicide stats, then it does include Quebec. And then it also excludes data for the St. John Municipal Police Service due to data accuracy issues. I don't know what that's about. Those exclusions will become important later on in this video, so I just want to point them out now. So off to our first data point. I said, if you've heard about Gary Mauser, you might have even heard about this problem before. In this article, in our main article, in text box 2, it says there is little information currently collected about whether the owner was licensed. And how Gary Mauser ties into this is he released this article June 27th, roughly speaking, a month after C21 came out and this other article came out. He released on this website here, Justice for Gun Owners, he released this article which kind of critiques our original article, this article here. He kind of goes in and picks parts of it apart. Some things he gets right, some things he gets wrong. That's not really all that important. But something he does point out here is that is information that they do have. It says here, given that StatsCan has the data about PAL holders, it remains difficult to understand why StatsCan refuses to point out that exceptionally few firearms are used in homicide or legally held. And if you click this link and you click a couple others, you go down that rabbit hole a little bit, you get to this page here, which Table 4 undermines Liberals' claims. And it shows us, and on this page you see this little sheet. This is actually a consolidated sheet that he made based on data that was submitted by Raquel Dancho. You know who Raquel Dancho is? She's a Conservative MP. She's done some pretty good work on C21, both as a public safety critic and as a vice chair on the SecU committee. So Raquel Dancho, vice chair of SecU, gathered this particular information here. This is a brief she had submitted to SecU. And the information in this brief is generated by the CCJCSS, the same article that we're critiquing in the topic of this video. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom of this, here's where you can actually see the chart that was actually submitted into SecU. But this is the information Gary Mauser is working on. We made that consolidated table. You can take a look at it if you want. It's not necessarily that important. What I want to point out is at the very bottom here. It says, note, prior to 2019, the homicide survey collected information regarding whether or not the charged individual possessed a firearms license. And after the survey underwent a redesign in 2019, the survey now collects better information about whether or not the charged person had a valid firearms license. Which means the homicide survey is directly collecting this information, but our original article said there is little information currently collected about whether the owner was licensed. But right here, in their own brief submitted to SECU, submitted on February 10th, 2022, so several months before this other article, they admit that the homicide survey collects this information. And because this article uses the homicide survey, they should know that information. They should openly know that information, and yet they're saying that they don't. There's little information about whether the owner was licensed, which is a lie. It's a bold-faced lie. Now that being said, that's something that Gary Mauser already pointed out. That's not entirely news. If you've heard about it, great. If you haven't heard about it, now you have. And here's the second thing I want to talk about. Number 2, if we take our 2.8% and our 8344 again, this is 2.8% of all victims of violent crime are victims of firearm-related violent crime. And that is a total of 8,344 people in the year of 2020. So if we scroll down on their article, we can take a look at crime rates here. And in 2020, as you can see, that was 29 per 100,000 that were firearm-related, and 1,065 all violent crime per 100,000. So if we take our 29 and we divide it by 1,065, and then multiply by 100, we figure out that the actual percentage is 2.72. And you might be going, well, that's strange. They just told us it was 2.8. But actually, that's sort of true. If you go down to the bottom of the article, there's reference note 4 here. These percentages were calculated in slightly different stats. If you account for all the crimes, it is 2.7, which is the number we just calculated. So those numbers are fine. They're not lying to us. I don't mind that. What I do mind is this number here, 1,065 of all violent crime. That's a problem. That's a big, big problem. You might be going, well, why is that a problem? The problem with that is this. All of their information in this article was based on the UCR, the Uniform Crime Reporting Survey. And if we go to Canada and we look at all violent crime in the year 2020, the rate per 100,000 population of all violent crime is 1,265.74. That number is dramatically different than their reported number here. They're missing almost 20% of all of their violent crime rate. Where is that going? What happened there? Well, if we take a look at our table 2, we can actually get better detailed information about this. So they say that all firearm infractions account for 8,344, which is good. They've already proved that number. The percent is either 2.7 or 2.8, as we'd already discussed. And their total number of infractions is 310,000. This is all the violent crime numbers reported in this article. The problem with that, if we go back to this page here, this is all based on the UCR. Their sources right here, the UCR. That's the same thing that we're using in our other article, and it's run by the same people. They claim that all of the incidents are 481,000 for that year. Not 310,000, 481,000. Now, I did tell you at the beginning of this, we're not including Quebec, and we're not including St. John, so we need to pull those numbers out. So if we just go up to the top here, and we go to Quebec, we hit apply, we can see that Quebec is responsible for roughly 95,000. If we take that out of our original count, we go to 481,000, take away 95,831, we get this number. We're getting closer. Now we do the same thing, but with St. John. So this is St. John, New Brunswick, and not St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. And they are responsible for 1,611 incidents. So we will take those out as well. This gives us a total infraction number of 383,630. If we go back and look at our original table here, we are missing about 73,500 incidents are just missing from this data set for no reason. There's nowhere else in this article that explains any eliminated information. There's nowhere else in their cliff notes and their data sources anywhere that justifies this amount missing. Which is a problem, because if you account for that, if you change your 310,000 to 383,000, you change the percentage of all firearm infractions. So instead of it being 2.8, it comes down a lot. And it's worth noting that this is not a mistake. If you want to call it that, but this isn't an error that they make in other articles. If you take a look at this article here, Police Reported Crime Statistics in 2021, this is authored by a different individual, but it's run by the same organization, the CCJCSS, same people. And if you go down to Table 3 in this article, they show us that police reported crime for selected offenses in 2020 and 2021. They have, in this article, the correct number. They know that it's the correct number. And they have the correct crime rate. This is based on the total population. This particular one actually does still include Quebec and St. John's. So all of this tells us that they have these numbers, and we know they have these numbers. Now there's one little caveat here. 2020, there's this little R next to 2020. If you scroll down, that means revised. So at some point they tweaked the numbers a little bit, but it wouldn't account for this level of difference. And it's also worth noting that if we go back to our Gary Mauser article, this was released only 1 month after our C21 article, and he has a number of 476,649. Not 310,000, but 476,000, which is very close to the actual number of 481. So it's probable that this little revised, this little R, isn't a big change. It was a little tweak that accounted for about 5,000 violent crime incidences. What that tweak was, I don't know. It doesn't say here. It doesn't disclose that. But this little R, or the little revision that they made, is not going to account in any way for a 73,500 crime gap. Like that's just a ridiculously large number to be off by. And then not only that, and they don't tell you this, but this 8344 number is actually inflated. It's much higher than it needs to be. For two reasons. One, in the original article here, it says, of note, for an incident to be considered firearm related, a firearm need only be present during the commission of the offense, not necessarily used. And that's a very broad definition. They don't really define what present means. Present could mean almost anything, and as a result, this number is going to be higher than you would think it would be. And then secondly, and perhaps more importantly, this is the actual breakdown. This is Table 8. This is the actual breakdown of where they get that 8344 number from. So fair enough, handguns, 4,500 of them. Rifles or shotguns, 1,500 of them. They have a category called Other Firearm. This will be your ghost guns. This will be fully automatic firearms. And this will also account for sawn-off shotguns and rifles. So any sort of normal full-sized hunting rifle, if you cut off either end to make it smaller, or any full-size, double-barrel shotgun, you cut it off to make it smaller, that would be also included in here. And that's only about 400 instances. And then they have this other category called Firearm-like Weapons or Unknown Weapons. Those are not firearms. If we click on the number 2 here, it says it includes all weapons that do not meet the criminal code definition of a firearm, which means they are not firearms. They're not guns. They're things that look like guns, feel like guns. It says here, you have devices like CO2 and pumped air. These are things like paintball guns and airsoft, stuff like that. You also have flare guns and pellet guns, like things that just aren't guns, things that can't really hurt somebody. That's not what you think of when you're thinking of a gun. And yet, they account for almost 1,900 firearms in this list. They account for, there's more fake guns out there in this list than there are real rifles and real shotguns. What the heck's that about? They aren't guns. They don't meet the legal definition of being a firearm, yet they are considered to be firearm-related crimes. So not only is your percentage skewed because they've omitted over 70,000 violent code offenses from their list for some reason, for a reason that isn't stated anywhere, but then two, their firearm-related crimes, their listed number of 8344 for firearm-related crimes is almost 2,000 higher than it needs to be. So if we recalculate some of these numbers, things are going to change quite a bit. So if we go back to our crime rates, they tell us that their rates are calculated based on July 1st population estimates from Statistics Canada, which is the Centre for Demography, which is this chart here. So if we go down, we look at 2020, we go to all of Canada. They said July 1st, which is in the third quarter. We take a look at our population number here. That's the total population of all of Canada during that time. But remember, they're not counting Quebec and they're not counting St. John's, so we need to pull those population numbers out. So we take 38,028,638. And from that, we take out Quebec's population, which is here, which is 8,551,095. And this gets us pretty close to the number we're looking for, but we also still need to take out St. John's. Now, I couldn't find any good StatsCan source on exactly what their population was. So if we go to Wikipedia here, if we look at the list of CAs and CMAs, which is how this article decides on things like whether they're rural or urban or which police jurisdictions they fall under, we scroll down to St. John, which is the population we got to pull out. They have a CMA of 130,613, but that's for 2021, so we got to actually fudge that number slightly. In my previous video, I called it 129.5. We're going to use that number again. It's pretty close, but if you disagree with that number and it's off by a couple hundred, it's not going to dramatically change the final result here. When we're talking about numbers up near 29 million, a couple hundred population either way just isn't going to make a difference. So we take away our 129.5, and this should be pretty close to the actual population they used in the article. So if we want to recalculate these rates based on the actual statistically correct information, we're going to have to change both of these numbers, this 29 and this 1065. Now keep in mind that the other crime rate that we're seeing on our parent article that said 1265, that's based on all of Canada's population. We actually still need to take out Quebec and St. John in order to match this article correctly, so we're going to do that. But first we'll take a look at firearm-related violent crime. So the number they gave us was 8,344, but it includes this almost 1,900 firearms that just don't make sense. Some of them might be an unknown weapon, and some of those might be actual firearms, but remember, based on their definition of it just being present, that's also going to be an inflated stat. So I'm just going to consider those two flaws washing themselves out. They're overestimating one way, and I'm going to underestimate the other way. The number should actually still be pretty close. So we take our 8344 and we subtract out our 1880, and we get 6464. 6,464 should be pretty close to the actual firearm violence numbers in Canada as you would think they would be, rather than just anything that's, where a firearm is present. Like, that's not really a great definition for a lot of people when they're thinking about, a robbery or an assault with a firearm or anything like that. This number should be pretty close. So to figure out our new firearm violent crime number, we have to take our 6464 and divide it by our calculated population, which was 29,348,043. Then we get this super tiny number, and we multiply that by 100,000. So this is our new firearm violent crime number, and it is a rate of 22 per 100,000, not a rate of 29 per 100,000. And then not only that, but this number is also incorrect, our 1065, so we need to recalculate that number based on using the appropriate numbers. And if you remember, they came up with a number of 310,000, which is way off, and the actual number is 383,000. And to figure out the all-violent crime number, we just do the same math again. So we take our actual number of incidents, 383,630. We divide it by our calculated population, which is 29,348,043. We get this really tiny number, and we multiply that by 100,000. And that is our crime rate per capita. Per 100,000 people, it's about 1,307 and not 1065. So what does this all mean? So at the beginning of the video, they told you guys, that the rate was 2.8%. But realistically, when you actually calculated it, came out to be 2.7%, which they also acknowledged. But let's just do that math again real quick just so you can see it. It's 29 divided by 1065 times by 100. Easy peasy. Now if we take the numbers we just calculated, which was 22, and we divide that by 1307, we're going to ignore the decimals because they both rounded pretty close to whole numbers. And we multiply that by 100. This is the actual firearm violent crime rate. It's nearly 1% entirely less than their numbers. Rather than it being at 2.72%, which they rounded kind of to 2.8, the actual number is 1.68%, which, in my opinion, is completely inexcusable. Maybe you believe I fudged some of the numbers. Maybe you think our 8344 is a good number and these numbers deserve to be in there. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. I don't think so, but that's up to you to decide. But either way, that number is still massively, massively off, and that number is calculated correctly. There's no opinion in that number. There's no conjecture in that number. That's just what the number is based on the UCR's evidence itself, based on the same evidence that they claim they were using for this article. Now, maybe you care about firearms, maybe you don't. Maybe you care about C21, maybe you don't. That's not really the point of this video. The point of this video is they're skewing the numbers. Whether or not you like firearms or firearm owners, and maybe you think every firearm needs to be banned, it is incredibly important that StatsCan is held accountable for their numbers and held responsible for their numbers. They are as close as we can get in Canada to an unbiased reporting agency for statistical information. Everywhere else, every university, every news outlet, everybody else is biased. And once that bias starts creeping in here, objective truth just disappears. And that's a severe problem. Well beyond whether or not you like firearms owners, that's a very severe problem. And in episode 2.1 of my video series on C21, I very strongly allude to the fact that the CCJCSS works for the Department of Justice and works very closely with the Public Safety Minister's Office for Marco Mendicino at the time. And that's kind of true for all Juristat. If we click on the Juristat up here, this is what Juristat articles actually are and what they actually do. It says this publication provides an in-depth analysis and detailed statistics on a variety of topics and issues related to justice and public safety. And the connection to the DOJ and the Public Safety Office is right here. The publication is intended for those with an interest in Canada's justice and public safety systems, as well as those who plan, establish, administer, and evaluate programs and projects related to justice and public safety. So right there, that tells you they work very closely with the Public Safety Minister's Office and Department of Justice Office. They work very closely together, and it's very disturbing to me that those offices can taint StatsCan. Like, there's no justifiable reason for the numbers in this article to be that far off, especially when their own numbers in other articles that aren't related to this controversial topic, they suddenly get those numbers right, and suddenly they start counting Quebec again. If we look at police reported crime statistics here, and if you just search by Quebec, it shows up over and over and over and over in this article. Like, it's everywhere. But for some reason, they don't want to talk about Quebec in this article, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They claim it's for statistical error issues, but I don't know that that's true, and I can't even trust that that's true, based on these two lies that they've told in this article alone. And then kind of one last thing I want to point out, this isn't really related to the point I was making, but this does really go to show just how StatsCan can be corrupted by politics if you go ahead and take a look at sort of the history of Juristat. Articles kind of in 2010, where the last Conservative Party was in office, you can just take a look at these things. Like, it's about police officers' safety, it's about homicide stats, it's about correctional services, it's about criminal victimization, youth this, adult that, police stats this, police stats that. And just year after year, it's homicides, it's all these very core statistical, just outright factual information. And it's just year after year, it's all that. And it's just year after year. Like, just look at these. We're looking kind of 2-3 years deep now. It's all just this hardcore statistical information. If you go to this year, can you imagine what they were talking about this year? If we go to the first page, it's gender-related issues. It's homicides of Indigenous women. It's discrimination this. It's Indigenous persons that. It's homicide of women and girls this. It's minority group that. Like, it's all of this identity politics stuff is what they're focusing on now. And that should be severely concerning to everybody. Not that we shouldn't be looking at those things, but we shouldn't be looking at exclusively those things. There is no, overall, there's one article in all of 2023 so far, which would be your sort of broad spectrum analysis of crime as a whole. There's one. Whereas, as you saw before, over the course of several years, there was almost zero of these identity politics-based research studies. They were looking into crime as a whole and how to reduce crime. And as a result, if you look at this statistic graph here, I've shown this a couple of times in my C21 study, and I'm going to show it here again. But if you just look at this graph, you can see the clear result that has. In the blue section of the chart, crime comes way down, and that's because they were asking all the right questions and they were studying all the right information. And even back in the Jean Chrétien days and the Paul Martin days, you see a decrease in violent crime numbers. It's not as steep necessarily, but it's still there. So this really isn't a conversation about red versus blue politics or anything like that. This is what happens when you let insanity take over and you let identity politics take over and you stop caring about factual truth and you start tainting and polluting what should be objective data gathering agencies. I mean, if we don't take this seriously, this could be very, very bad for the future of Canada. I don't say that lightly. Certainly, I don't say that as any sort of expert on the matter. But if you're asking all the wrong questions and you're intentionally skewing the data in order to fit your own story and your own presuppositions and your own narrative, that's unbelievably dangerous. And that danger is backed up by the statistical evidence on this chart. You expect that from the media, you expect that, maybe even educational institutions, your schools, high schools, universities, whatever. But StatsCan is supposed to be, in theory, unbiased. It's supposed to be, in theory, an objective data gathering agency. And as we can see here, as I've shown you in the video regarding at least this particular article, that is just not true. There is no good reason to omit over 73,000 violent crime incidences, except to skew the numbers to fit their own narrative. I'll put a couple of pie charts up here on the table so you can see exactly how this skews the numbers. And it may not look like a lot because we were already talking about fairly small slivers, but in my opinion, it's quite a bit. From 2.72% down to a 1.68%, that percentage is almost 60% higher than it statistically needs to be and than it statistically should be, based on evidence that we know they already have, and that they've shown us they already have in other articles. They've just omitted it from this highly politicized topic for some reason. So that's all I'm going to say about that. I hope this gives you something to think about, and I hope you really consider what I've said about Stats Canada, as well as their objectivity and how important that is. Like I say, whether or not you care about firearms, that's not the point. The point here, of this video anyway, is StatsCan. If you're interested in the firearm conversation, I am currently doing a study. I'm trying to release 1 or 2 videos a week. I'm trying to get it done before they get done in the Senate here. So if you're interested in that, click on through to the series. And other than that, thanks for watching.